We are back on the 0 Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and it's time to talk about a subject that it may be difficult for some of us. It's time for that talk. I'm talking about the Donald Trump cabinet. I'm sorry we have to talk about it. And some of the questions that come up when we're talking about Donald Trump's cabinet include, does he think we're a bunch of jabronies? And will Trump bring about the robot apocalypse? That's just the kind of guy he's been showing himself to be and the kind of person he's been picking for his cabinet. But we have to start with this. One thing we now know, because of Trump's appointment, both to cabinet positions and other administration posts, we know that Trump has pulled off the biggest grift in American history. He has grifted a sufficient number of voters in order to take the presidency by pretending to be a populist and then hijacking the entire government on behalf of the 0.01%. Now, let's first of all talk about who the 0.01% is. There was a study out by Deutsche Bank, not exactly a lefty organization. The study came out last week showing that we have now reached the point in the United States economy where 0.1% of the population owns as much of the economy as 90% of the population. Now, I know you can do the math for yourself, but let me break that down for you. That means that if we were a room with 1,000 people in it, one person in that room would own as much as 900 other people in that room. That's what it's come to in the United States of America for inequality, and that's who Donald Trump represents. Now, when you have that kind of inequality, we already know from studies done by political scientists at Princeton, for example, we already know that the government largely works on behalf of the wealthy and powerful anyway. But what Trump has done with his big grift is he has made sure that those oligarchs have eliminated the middleman, unless we're talking about generals, of course, but by and large, when it comes to the economy, that oligarchs have eliminated the middleman of, an elected official or whatever, and are now actually controlling the levers of government themselves. Who am I talking about with all of this? Well, he's got a lot of Goldman Sachs folks in there. He's got Steve Bannon, who's his proto-fascist advisor, comes out of Goldman Sachs and made a lot of money there. We have a couple other folks from Goldman Sachs as well. And by the way, when we talk about Goldman Sachs, this is a guy who ran against Goldman Sachs. He said, this is Trump, said, I know the guys at Goldman Sachs. They have total control over Ted Cruz, who he was running against, just like they have total control over Hillary Clinton. But now Trump has appointed Goldman Sachs chief operating officer Gary Cohn to a position. He has given a position to Steve Bannon, and there is Steve Mnuchin, who comes out of Goldman Sachs as well, and his transition advisor Anthony Scaramucci. So we have Trump's Goldman Sachs piece. Now, how did he pull off a grift like running against Goldman Sachs and then putting them into such positions of power? Well, studies have shown that when people are in economic distress, it's easier to pull a financial hoax on them. For example, there was a study by Boston College's Center for Retirement Research. It showed that people who are in financial fear, like seniors, for example, can be fooled by predators, which I think is what Trump is turning out to be. So there's the Goldman grift. That's part of the Trump grift, but it isn't the entire Trump grift. He has chosen as Secretary of Labor someone named Andrew Puzder. Now, Andrew Puzder has no experience in government, like many Trump appointees. He is the CEO of the parent company to Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. Now, let me just read to you. According to the 1913 law that created the Department of Labor, quote, the purpose of the Department of Labor shall be to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of the wage earners of the United States, to improve their working conditions, and to advance their opportunities for profitable employment. Now, Andrew Puzder, actually does not want the minimum wage increase, opposes the fight for 15. And here's what he said when they did an experiment in automating some of their employees at a Hardee's chain that Puzder runs. And this is what he said about why he likes machines better than people. Quote, and I'm quoting the future Secretary of Labor, they're, quote, about the machines, they're always polite, they always upsell, they never take a vacation, they never show up late, there's never a slip and fall or an age, sex, or race discrimination case. In other words, we now have the first Secretary of Labor in history who wants to eliminate labor from the business process altogether. You want fries with that robot apocalypse? Now, look, the Hardee's experiment in automation was mostly hype, as frankly, a lot of these experiments in automation are mostly hype, whether it's driverless cars by Google. They may be coming someday, but they're not coming as quickly as they want you to believe, or Uber's driverless cars, or other things that are going on. They really, when people put on demos like this, it's usually to send an ideological message or to fight for deregulation. In Puzder's case, he was very explicitly trying to use his demonstration project to argue against minimum wage increases. He said, quote, with government driving up the cost of labor, it's driving down the number of jobs. You're going to see automation not just in airports and grocery stores, but in restaurants. It's actually hard to automate restaurant jobs, but the fact is he was certainly talking about doing it, and he was doing it in order to pressure the government. That's the guy who's now going to be in charge of the welfare and well-being of American workers. Now, to be fair, Trump is also anti-business. If you're a certain kind of business, Trump is against the kind of business that actually creates jobs, which is to say small and medium-sized businesses. He's a big corporation, big Wall Street kind of guy. He's not a corner operation business, mom and pop, that gives jobs to people kind of guy. And to prove that, as head of the Small Business Administration, he hired wrestling executive Linda McMahon. Now, the World Wrestling, what's it called again? It used to be WWF. It's WW. It's World Wrestling Entertainment Incorporated. WWE is a mega business. And Vince McMahon, who's usually the CEO, Linda was the CEO while he was on trial, Vince McMahon has actually bragged about not being in small business. He said in the old days, there were wrestling fiefdoms all over the country. There were maybe 30 of these tiny kingdoms, and if I hadn't bought out my dad, there would still be 30 of them, fragmented and struggling. In other words, the person who will run the Small Business Administration actually likes to brag, or her husband actually likes to brag about not having small businesses at all in their own industry, but dominating it with monopoly, which is what the Small Business Administration was partially designed to fight. So we have a monopolistic enemy of small business running the Small Business Administration. But that's the government under Trump. Stick around, more to come. I'm Richard RJ Eskow for the Zero Hour.